Hello everyone! Welcome back to another creative building time-lapse. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through my process of building this winter fairy, the last fairy in my seasonal fairy collection that I've been doing. Let's get started with some terrain. So we're going to start off with the plugin Go Brush, creating just some general rounded terrain, nothing too crazy as I don't want this terrain to be a main focal point. Then I'm going to color it with some simple white colors. Some areas are shaded a little darker because they will have organics over them. Speaking of organics, let's start with something that's going to make or break this scene. The trees. Trees are always my favorite part of any build, and for this winter build, I decided that doing evergreen trees would be our best bet. But evergreen trees are fairly complicated to build. They have a lot of branches and a lot of different little needles for leaves, which can be quite a challenge to build. I decided to layer my branches using the curve command to create lots of different branches of different sizes on different angles at different points of the trunk. Although this was very time consuming, it was definitely worth it in the end, and I think it gave a fairly realistic effect, paired with the fact that I used several different shapes for my pine needles and used the brush copy command to paste these around onto the tree. I think the end result was fairly good, but there may be a better technique that I don't know about yet. Once the trees are done, I can take the first one, rotate it around, and change the height of it a couple of times, just to give some variation without having to build this tree over 5 different times. That would have been a little bit too painful for something that's meant to be more of a background feature. Then, it's time to begin on our fairy, starting with the basic skeleton. This is such an important step that way too many people skip. Doing this skeleton allows me to get the proportions correct right away and scale it properly within the scene of my build, getting the arms and legs the right height and marking out my torso's width. Once I'm happy with the skeleton that I created, I then bring it off to the side and use some voxel balls to thicken out this body. This was a good compromise for me because in the past I've tried doing this by hand and ended up making my organic too thin. I've also done it entirely with commands like I have a tutorial on, and although this worked for me, it worked better for more complex poses than this one. I'm very happy with the way my body turned out, and I ended up not focusing the smoothing too much on the lower parts because I knew that this part would be covered with a dress eventually. Speaking of that dress, it's time to work on that now. I'm using the loft command in the plugin Archeon to create this very simple dress. I want this dress to be long and very elegant. I want it to look like it will keep our fairy warm in the winter, but I also want it to be fairly elegant and fairy-like still. I added some simple blue ribbons around the edge and some poofy parts around the collar and sleeves. Once these details are in place, we can work on the hands, the head, and the neck smoothing, and then move on to more details like the wings. For the wings, I'm going to be using the curve command and experimenting with a few different shapes, but eventually I settle on a nice, soft, rounder shape. And once that's in place, it's easy to fill it in with some ice and add some different sparkles. Now that the wings are done, we fill in the color of skin that we want and shade it a little bit, adding in some gloves and boots, some ears, some hair ties, as well as a necklace. These details make such a big difference to our fairy. And now that our fairy is pasted into the build, we can move on to the next organic, which is going to be a wolf. We're going through the exact same process as we did with the fairy for the wolf, but this is my first time creating a large-scale animal organic. I've never actually tried it before because I've been too scared to attempt it. I mean, it's a really intimidating process and such a challenge to get it correct. Legs in particular were very much a challenge for me. I struggled with them a lot and I don't think they ended up perfect, but it is definitely something that I can work on in the future. Once I'm happy with the shape of my wolf and I have it rotated on an angle, we can start worrying about the color. First, I'm going to add some simple fur to it. I'm using the CS spike command to create different spikes all over its body. I'm going to replace these out with glass to make it look like our wolf is a little fluffier than it would be otherwise. I kind of like the effect that this gives. Then I shade it all over with some different variations of gray and white. Once the wolf and fairy are both in place, we can now move on to detailing the entire scene, adding some pine cones and icicles to our trees and coating them in a good layer of snow. And once that's done, I would like our fairy to hold some magic, so I create some simple snowflakes and some nice twirly magic particles coming out of her hand. And then, as another nice detail, I add some footprints in the snow behind the wolf and our fairy. Then, as a final detail, I would like to add a lamppost lighting the way during this winter day with a simple lantern on it. I really like this detail as a finishing touch. I think it finishes off the build nicely. And with that finished, our fairy is complete. I think this may be my favorite fairy of all 4 seasonal fairies that I have completed. Let me know which fairy is your favorite. I love the whole entire scene with the trees, the wolf, the lantern, the snowflake magic, and the gorgeous flowy dress. Anyways, with that said, thank you so much for watching and supporting my channel. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye!